Hi, welcome to Visual Studio Toolbox Live. I'm your host, Robert Green. I know that intro is 2.5 minutes long, but I cannot sit here for 2.5 minutes listening to it, knowing that you guys are out there waiting for us to talk. So one of these days I'll change that. Anyway, welcome to Visual Studio Toolbox Live. My guest today is Erik Jensen. Hello, Erik. How are you?
Hello, Robert. Very well, thank you, and nice to be on the show.
Great to have you back on the show. Erik is the author of a small number of very, very, very useful extensions. Some people write a lot and they're useful. Some people write a few and they're very useful. I put you in that category. I
Thank
think
you.
the first one I used of yours was the SQLite Toolbox and SQL Server Compact Toolbox, because it gave me basically Server Explorer for SQLite, which was just so useful. And then I've also used the Entity Framework Core Power Tools. I think I used the Entity Framework 6 Power Tools as well. And a couple
Yeah.
of years ago, we had you on the show to show us the Entity Framework, the EF Core Power Tools. It's been a couple of years though, and
Mm-hmm.
new things have happened in them. And so
Mm-hmm.
you're back to show us what's in them. So if you've never used them before, you're in the right place because you'll learn how to use them. If you are currently using them, you're in the right place because you'll get to see all the enhancements and the changes. And so with that, tell us what they are.
Well, EF Core is an ORM framework developed by the .NET team in Microsoft, or part of a small tip under the .NET team in Microsoft. And EF Core Power Tools is a visual tool that allows you to perform various operations that helps you get started quite quickly with using EF Core inside Visual Studio. One of the
Okay,
main
so
features.
let's just interrupt for 1 second. Viral said, what do you mean by power tools? Is it like power apps?
Um, it's more in relation to the fact that the previous version of this Visual Studio enhanced tooling was also called Power Tools. So it's more visual helpers and a nice visual experience on top of the SDK and the command line tooling that
Yeah.
the EF Core team provides.
So it's an extension for Visual Studio.
Yes, and it runs inside Visual Studio.
Yep.
You can browse a place called Visual Studio Marketplace and read about it. But of course, with any extension in Visual Studio, you can install it from the extension manager inside Visual Studio. I will quickly show where that is located once we switch to Visual Studio.
Yep.
Yes. So this tool can connect to any database that is supported by EF Core, and it will save your database connection information, including potentially your credentials, in a safe place by help of something called DDEX inside Visual Studio, or it will also use the credential manager in Windows if there is no DDEX provider, if there's no connector inside Visual Studio to save connections inside Server Explorer in Visual Studio.
Mm-hmm.
To help with that, I have recently realized that you can actually pack a number of extensions. So I have made an extension pack which includes Power Tools and also a couple of these providers. It's called DDEX providers. I don't really know what it means, but it basically means that once they are installed, you can create connections to SQLite and in this case Postgres SQL, and store that inside Server Explorer in a safe and encrypted location on your machine.
Oh, cool. So from inside
Yes,
Visual Studio. Oh, that's cool.
correct. Yes, inside Server Explorer in Visual Studio.
Nice.
And all my extensions are available as open source, and you can browse the code and even contribute or come with feature suggestions and potentially even bug reports in GitHub. And in my GitHub profile, my profile name is Erik EJ, and you will also find link to my Stack Overflow and X account on that same spot.
Cool.
Yes. So let's switch to Visual Studio. Where are you? There you are. So, so I'm going to show you how you quickly can take an existing database and generate a DB context. A DB context is the class that holds everything together with Entity Framework, and it allows you to. And it's a class that you can instantiate and then execute queries or even update and delete statements against your database, and run a link to entities queries using a C# link feature. On the way, I will show for some of the users that maybe have not used EF Core Power Tools in a while and have used it a while ago. I will show you some of the UX improvements that I have made recently. So to get started with EF Core Power Tools, as I said, you need to install it, and you can install it from the extension manager. I'm also showcasing here the new extension manager, which is a little bit different layout than we're used to, with more focus on description of the extensions. So it's taking the README file from the extension information and making that very highlighting that a lot more than happened before.
Yeah, that's
And
nice.
yes, it's really nice actually. So you basically search for EF Core here, and you should be able to get. Yes, you'll see the first hit on this list is EF Core Power Tool, and as you can see, I already have it installed now. But otherwise, you could click the install button, and it will be added once you restart Visual Studio. And once it's installed, on each project that supports it, it will be available in the right-click menu in the project. So I have created a .NET 8 console app here. This is what the project file looks like, and this is what Program CS looks like. It's basically just those two files that constitutes the project at the moment. I will right-click, and you will see an EF Core Power Tools menu item added to the right-click menu. There's only a limited number of options available here because EF Core is not installed in this project. But let's pick a reverse engineer. I will just quickly remove this existing connection. So I can choose what I want to connect to. So I can connect to, as I mentioned before, a database of any providers that the EF Core supports, and that includes SQL Server, Azure SQL Database, SQLite, MySQL, Oracle, and Postgres. So I go in here and I can add a database connection. I can also add what I call a custom connection, and a custom connection, I have added that feature because some of the database types like Firebird and MySQL, they don't have a way to connect inside Visual Studio. So I store these connections somewhere else in the credential manager. And you can also add a link to a DAC file, which is a specialized SQL Server specific technology that allows you to also have a schema description inside it. But let's just add a plain database connection. I'm going to add to my SQL Express instance, and I'm going to make encryption optional because otherwise I can't connect to it. So yeah, this is actually quite interesting that this new feature where you have to choose encryption and make it optional was added recently, because previously the default for encryption was always false, but it was changed for security reasons to default to always true. So in order to connect, for example, to my SQL Express instance, I actually have to go in and explicitly set it to false.
Okay.
If I don't do that, let me just show you. I will get an error message like this.
Yeah.
The certificate chain was issued by an authority that is not trusted. So yeah, that won't work. So let's switch it off. And I can point to my Northwind database. Click OK. And then that connection will be available in this dropdown. So this dropdown will contain all my custom connections, all my connections that are actually living inside Server Explorer, and also any links to Darkpack files I have added.
So you created a .NET 8 project, but the default EF Core version is 7? Is
Yeah,
in there yet, or is that coming?
It's actually there, but it's not the default value. And I don't actually look at the, maybe I should consider that, I actually don't look at the target framework, because previously the target framework could be both .NET 7 and .NET 6, and you could use both. But it's actually an idea that maybe if you're running .NET 8, you should I would probably consider that you are also wanting to run EF Core 8, because EF Core 8 requires .NET 8.
Yeah.
Yes. Just to be clear, people sometimes ask, yes, I see a lot of connections here and I actually want to get rid of them. Then I have added a feature to actually remove them. But let me just reveal that they're actually stored inside Server Explorer. So the connection we just made is here under data connections in Server Explorer as well. So when you interact with it and create this type of connection, it's actually stored in here. I'm digressing, but yes, it's actually quite interesting. So let's say now I'm always, this dialog, I have hard coded it to default to the Microsoft SQL Server connector, which can connect to a SQL Server on premise, and of course also to Azure SQL database. But if we want to connect to one of the other database types, I actually have installed this Power Pack in my Visual Studio preview here. So I can also pick Postgres SQL database or SQLite in here. And if I pick SQLite, I will get a completely different dialog where I basically just have to put in the file name and I can connect to that instead.
Okay, so that actually answers Dick's question about the difference between the Power Tools and the Power Pack. The Power Pack contains additional features, including what you just showed.
Yes, exactly. Essentially, I couldn't really make Power Tools into a pack. I wish I could, but the second best thing to that was to create the Power Pack, and which then will include, and if more providers are becoming available, like if somebody decides to make a Firebird or a MySQL provider for Visual Studio as well, then I can also add those to the Power Pack. So a Power Pack is basically just an umbrella for X number of extensions.
Okay.
Yeah.
One more question before we move on.
Absolutely. Let's keep them coming. And
is this available for all or only for enterprise?
What is?
Is this extension, does it work in all editions or only enterprise?
It works in all editions, also community, also the free edition called Community. Yes, good question. So yeah, any questions about EF Core, Visual Studio extensibility, and of course this tool, keep them coming. So we'll pick EF Core 8, just to be living on the edge here. And I'm also, if you notice, I'm also running inside the latest Visual Studio preview. Yes. Let me just quickly, before I'm not postponing the demo, but I just want to show you, if you if you are used to adding items in a different way, like with Control-Shift-A, for example, you can actually also do that with Power Tools now. It's a new thing I've added. So you actually have the EF Core database first wizard template in here. Cool. And that will actually eventually take you to the same dialog we saw before, but it's just a different way of launching the tool, which is more in line with the old way of initiating a connection and creating an EDMX file with Entity Framework 6 Classic.
Okay.
Yes. Now we have established a connection to our database, which in this case is my local SQL Server Express database file, but as I mentioned, it could be other things and it could be other providers. We will insist on using EF Core 8. And now we get a list of all the objects that are discovered inside our database. And if you are aware of what the normal tooling, the command line tooling can do, it cannot map stored procedures and functions, but that is a feature of EF Core Power Tools, that it's able to map SQL Server stored procedures and functions on top of views and tables. Let's just stick to the tables for this demo purpose. Of course, you can expand and look at all the tables inside a single schema here. And then if you want, if there's some of these tables you don't want, let's just get rid of this migration history one. It seems to be relating to some old version of Entity Framework that we don't really want to be concerned with. So we don't want to include that in our generated code. So, and now we get this dialog also used to be much more complex and have a lot of options inside it, a lot of text boxes to fill in. I've tried to make it more compact, so there's only the essential options that are needed in order to start generating code and using EF Core that are presented here. We'll notice that you can now customize code using T4 templates. Previously, you could only use handlebars templates, but from EF Core 7 and onwards, you can actually customize code using T4 templates. I will point to some more information about that later during the session. And we can include a connection string in the generated code. This is normally something you wouldn't do for a production app, but it's really a nice feature for demo purposes, because then you don't need to type the connection string. I have a link here directly to the help for the wiki for the tool, which will take you to the GitHub wiki page. And I have quite, as you can see from the table of contents on the right side, quite extensive documentation about all the things that we're going through here in this demo and much more. You can also, there's also a direct link where you can go into Marketplace and rate my extension. Of course, if you like this tool, which is completely free and open source, I would be very grateful for rating in Visual Studio Marketplace. There's also a lot of advanced options. They are all well documented, or I hope they're all well documented. Let me know if they're not in the wiki, which concerns how the code is generated, how files are laid out on disk, what namespaces are used, and what special types are mapped. And as you can see, this option, which is an advanced option, has already been switched on for us. This is due to the fact that date only and time only is inherently supported in EF Core 8, so it makes sense to always have these on. Date only and time only are new types that were introduced in .NET 6, and they very well represent some SQL Server related types that are called date and time. So the area of values that these two types in SQL Server has completely match the span of possible values for date only and time only, which, as I said, were introduced in .NET 6, and now there's built-in support for that with SQL Server and EF Core 8.
Cool.
Yes. So finally, yes, now we have gone through this, and I've not really I've diverted a lot of times, but let's see how quickly we can actually do this. So one more time, reverse engineer, pick our database. We have made our selections, unselected this particular table.
I know, the suspense is killing me.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And we'll click OK. And as you can see in the status bar, code is being generated.
Nice.
Okay, I had some problems with actually rendering this README file, but suddenly it's working now. That's the demo gods were with us today. So what's happening here is that the code has been generated in the models folder. I will just zoom into that in a little while, but I will also point out that I now have include a README file that will help you get started with
Oh,
actually
that's
using the
nice. Yep.
context. I wish there was a way that I could just show the rendered markdown file according to Mads Christensen. There isn't at the moment where I could just get rid of this editor window, but I can't. Yeah, never mind. So this will actually tell you what you need to do in your code if you, for example, have an ASP.NET Core application or some other application that's using dependency injection, how to do this, and they will also show you what you should add to your user secrets or your app settings file in order to actually connect to this particular database.
Cool.
Yes, and if there was some issues discovered during some warnings generated during code generation, they will be listed down here as well. And there's also, of course, links to the documentation and the marketplace and so on. Yes, so let's have a closer look at the code. So what is generated here is a context file. Everything that is generated is partial classes. So if you need to do additional mapping, you can actually create your own partial class, and there's a partial method down here you can override. Let me just show you. So this code that I'm browsing through here, these 400 lines of code, is all code that defines the mapping between the generated classes and the actual tables in the database. But you can override this on model creation partial methods if you want to refine the mapping of all the entities.
Okay.
And then for each table, a class is generated. And I have chosen not to use data annotations, which means these attributes that defines that this represents a table and this represents a customer ID column and so on. But that is an option that you can switch on if you prefer that way of code generation. Just be aware that even if you're using data annotations with EF Core, there will always be some code, some of the in the mapping code. There will most likely always be some mapping code here, because not everything that is generated here can be represented as annotations.
Okay.
Yes. So some of the new features is, as mentioned already, is EF Core 8 support, and EF Core 8, as you may know, will be released in the beginning of November this year, together with ASP.NET Core 8 and .NET 8, and it will inherently support those new data types that I just mentioned, date only and time only. If you are still using EF Core 6 or 7, I have created an NuGet package that enables you to also take advantage of these data types with EF Core 6 or 7.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. So let's try to see if we can interact with the database. I'm just going to show you what I did with this. Can we see this somewhere? Yeah, so I actually chose to include the connection string, and that means I will be adding, I have now added this additional line of code here, which is the connection string. But there's a warning generated here, and basically saying you should actually not be doing this. You should use the configuration system to configure your connection string. You should not put in hard-coded connection string in your generated code. I'm just pointing it out, but it's a nice feature to have if you just want to quickly demonstrate or try out something. So we can start db equal new Northwind context. Now I'm using the context, and it's a class representing each of the tables under it, which are these so-called DB set, and I can use, for example, refer to the categories. and I'm running Copilot, so it's really helping me with writing my demo code here.
Ah.
So it's actually not only did it realize I wanted to do this, but I actually said, okay, let's do some demo stuff and write the category name to the console. Which is really nice after me just typing db.categories. So yeah. So now this link to SQL query will actually list all the categories that start with B. Let's see if there are any at all. I have no idea. I'm completely in the hands of GitHub Copilot now. So so now I'm pressing F5 to actually run the app. Yes, hello, it's running. And there was, lo and
Beverages.
behold,
All right.
beverages was a category in the a category with B in the categories table in this database. So that's all good and dandy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, a couple questions while we're
Yes.
at it.
Mm-hmm.
So very quickly from Dick Baker, SQL Express
Yes.
versus SQL Dev Edition.
Yes.
How would you pick one over the other?
Um. If you're running EF Core, it doesn't really matter because it doesn't really differentiate about with those editions. If you want to use a workflow where you are defining your schema first and you want to do online operations, the developer edition is basically the same edition as enterprise edition.
Mm-hmm.
So it corresponds to enterprise. So if you wanted to do SQL scripts where you are specifically targeting enterprise edition, then developer edition can be helpful. Otherwise, or if you really want to store huge amounts of data and not live under it's not constrained as SQL Express is. SQL Express is constrained to a single CPU and a single core and a maximum database size of 10 gigabytes.
Yep.
It's
According
usually
to
not something
William.
you
That's right. Thank you, William.
is usually not something you run into. But if you're targeting enterprise edition and want to write some SQL statements like some index build statements where you're using online operation, then certainly it makes sense to install that, and that's also free. I think you can install it via your MSDN subscription.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Viral asks, after you install the extension, do you have to install the other packages like Entity Framework Core.SQL Server, or is that just part of .NET? Is that automatically there? I guess is the question.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So what happened during the running of the tool? I don't know if you noticed. I didn't actually point that out. I'm sorry about that. But what has also happened is that now all these settings we did during our first run of the tool has actually been persisted to disk. I will show you where just in a second. But what also is important is we have this option down here, install the EF Core provider package in the project. So the answer to your question is if you let the tool figure out that it's not already installed and just leave this on, the correct provider package and the correct version of it will be automatically installed by the tool. Also, if you go in and add these additional mappings, then you need to install some additional packages, and all those additional packages will also be pulled in by the tool because it knows that if you're asking for spatial support, an additional package should be added. And where is that package added? It's added in a project file as a package reference. So this will actually install Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server 8.0 RC2 at the moment, and maybe soon it will be just 8.0.0 because it will be released in Was it this is 14th of November
Well,
approximately? I
November
think.
14th is .NET Conf as well as Ignite, so
Yeah,
I'm going to assume it's
I
that
think
day.
it's around that day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
So yes.
One more question from Dick.
Hmm.
Code first allows to create TPH, but can reverse engineer round trip such inheritance mapping back into C# code.
Sorry, the question. What was the question?
So code first allows you to create TPH, comma
Hmm.
TPH, etc. But can you reverse engineer round trip such inheritance mapping back into C# code, e.g.
Not with
discriminator aware?
not with the EF Core Power Tools. No.
Okay,
No, you can't.
great.
This is, and also uh, don't expect that's not really, that's just how the team decided reverse engineering. Don't expect that you can easily switch from uh, reverse engineering and then start to use migrations, because not all aspects of the database definition are actually included in the reverse engineered part.
Mm-hmm.
The reverse engineered mapping, it's just what is needed to interact well with a database, but not necessarily to create scripts to create a database that 100% with 100% fidelity represents what you came from. Uh, yeah. So it's not really made for switching between reverse engineering, like database first and then switching to migrations.
Okay, cool.
It's a choice you have to take. Yes. So all these options we set, like with the tables we chose and the options we chose, are actually persisted in this file, which is added to your project. And this is used by the tooling. It's not really a file that you should be concerned with editing, but it's nice to have it in source control, because then if you're working in a team, then everybody in the team will inherit those same settings that apply to this particular DB context.
All right. So, one last thing. Viral had a question about how you get started with GitHub Copilot, and I'm going to there we go. There's a link to the docs, Viral, and anybody else that wants to know how you get started with GitHub Copilot. There's also been several episodes on .NET. I think
Yeah,
.NET Live. I think
yeah,
we've done episodes on it. I'm sure it's going to be talked about at .NET
yeah,
Conf. So there's a lot
yeah,
of videos you can look at, but
yeah,
that link will give you a good overview.
yeah.
And then play around with it and see if you like it.
Hmm. I have a really good experience with it. In particular, if you are writing tests, for example, it's really good at proposing what the shape of your test classes should look like if
Ooh,
you're
that would
using
be
XUnit
handy.
test,
Yeah.
and it can actually also generate a SQL for you. So if you are working with a database project and it knows a little bit about the context and the database tables in your project, it can
Mm-hmm.
actually also propose, like, create a stored procedure for doing inserts into this table and things like that. It's
Nice.
can be quite helpful. Yes.
Okay.
How did I get it? Actually, I think in this in 17.8, which is the one I'm running, you actually say if you're licensed to use it, you can actually just install it as part of the product installation. I think that's new. It used to be an extension, but now it's part of the actual probably enterprise scoop, as far as I can tell.
Okay. Karax has a feature request, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any
Interesting.
option to run the C# code after the model generation? I need multiple changes to be done, so I wonder if I can have it in a single button process instead of separate steps.
That's a very good question. You can you can launch a command file after the tool runs. Um, It's in the docs. I can't even remember exact name of it, but if it's present in the project at the same place as a config file, the tool will actually run this post-processing
okay.
command tool, a command line file, and then that command line file can do whatever you want to do. If you want to run an app console app that you have created, or some PowerShell script, or whatever, the tool, the command line file can
Yeah.
do that for you.
All
So
right.
yes,
Finn
it's
wants to
definitely possible.
know, there's a Mongo client for EF Core 8 in preview now. Do you have any plans to include NoSQL stuff in the power tools?
Yeah, but if it makes sense, I'm not really sure what I should be including. But if you can come up with some good use cases, I would be more than happy to it. And I think it's really, really cool that MongoDB has released this provider. It's so now there is two NoSQL providers for EF Core. There's a lot of relational providers, as we already gone through, which is what we're looking at here, together with SQLite, Postgres, SQL, and all the others. But there's a Cosmos DB provider provided by the EF Core team themselves.
Mhm.
And then there's this new MongoDB provider, which just was basically literally released like 1 week ago. So that's also really awesome that that the model for creating a NoSQL provider actually works with something else than just a Cosmos DB provider.
Cool.
Mm-hmm. So let me just quickly show another small feature that has been added recently. It was there, and then it left, and then now it's back again with a vengeance. I've added another feature to Power Tools that allows you to visualize your database schema. It used to be there, but it was really hard tied to SQL Server. But now this little thing here, this little gadget here, actually works with any EF Core relational provider, because each relational provider that can do reverse engineering, they can actually expose a database, what is called like a generalized database model that describes their database schema. So this is what this tool is visualizing. So I can pick my connection here, and as I said before, it could be any of the supported database types. Let's just do it for Northwind. I think there's probably too many tables in Northwind to be actually really useful, but I guess you get the idea. And I can zoom in. So this is a technology called DGML, which is a technology that was added in Visual Studio 2010, if I remember correctly. And it's basically XML file that describes some objects and how these objects are connected with each other, and then it can render those connections in a nice way. Of course, we have all these views or whatever I selected by mistake before. Sorry about that, but or at least tables that don't really relate to anything. But if we look at the order details table, we can actually expand them, and it will interactively show all the columns, and we can show the legend, and all the colors indicate different types of columns inside this order details table. So this is visualizing your database schema. It doesn't really have anything to do with EF Core as such, but it's actually piggybacking on the fact that EF Core provider exposes a standardized model of describing the tables, the columns, and how they relate to each other.
That is cool. And I like how that's such a clean view. It's not cluttered up with what's the key and
and I think it's actually
what are the data types, which if you just want to know what the fields are and how they relate, that's very clean.
Yes, and you can actually, if I don't know if you can see this
there.
It does actually, sorry, didn't mean to press that button.
But I think for the purposes of just looking at it, quantity, I may not care if it's an int, a small int.
I'm not really interested, but if you hover over it, you can actually see that it is a small int, not so that's also something that can
I like that.
Yes. So this has been added recently because I revisited this feature and realized that I could make it more generally useful than just using it for SQL Server only. So I don't know if there's any more questions
Not at the moment.
relating to the extension.
Actually,
Okay.
Dick has a question about T4. What
Yes.
T4 tools can you run after reverse engineering?
Yeah, actually, that's not how T4 works. It's actually running as part of reverse engineering. So we can just do a quick demo, and I will show you. So what happens is that it's instead of sorry, let me put it like this: in EF Core 7 and later, it's actually T4 that always generates the generated code, and then Power Tools go in and maybe does some fiddling with it based on the advanced options that you chose. But it's actually the code is actually generated by the T4 processor, even in EF.NET, sorry, EF Core 7 and later. But you can, so it's using kind of built-in templates, baked-in templates, but then you can add the templates as physical files in your project, and then you are in control of what's happening in those templates. And how do you do that? You just simply go in and reverse engineer. We'll use all the same options. We'll use all the same options here. And then you say, yes, I want to customize my code using templates. And we will choose T4 templates as stated here, excuse me. And you can immediately see that our code templates folder is added to the project. If I just zoom in here, and that contains an EF Core folder, which has 2 T4 files.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody from the EF Core team called Bryce Lamson, a developer on the EF Core team, actually created a little color-coded text editor, also a Visual Studio extension. Let me see if I can find it. T4. T4 language, basic language support for TT files.
Oh, cool.
Which helps with the color coding and some various snippets and things like that. But certainly color coding is a huge help. I don't think I have this installed in my preview edition. So if we just open a T4 file here, it's going to look it's a little bit hard on your eyes here.
Yeah.
To put it politely, because it's just a lot of but with that editor, also with that color coding in hand, certainly it's easier to work with. And I have in my GitHub repository, I have an issue saying T4 customizations, where I've collected a number of proposals for various customizations that could be useful to do in T4, and or usually will link about exactly how to implement them in the templates, to add them to the templates that I can refer to. If I just quickly switch to my GitHub profile and Power Tools, then there's this issue here, T4 customizations and tips, which is a long list of additional things you can do with T4, and the ones with a check mark, I have actually got an example for them. And I'm considering creating like a super template or something like that you can pick instead of the ones supplied by the team, where you can switch all these things on and off as you want. So,
Cool.
yeah. Mm-hmm. So I hope that was some intro on the T4 templates. Let me also mention that I have a .NET Conf 2022 talk, where I go into some of the customizations you can do, and talk a little bit about what T4 technology is at all.
Cool.
From last year, that you can watch if you want to know more about T4.
Are you speaking at .NET Conf this year?
Yes, I was speaking
Excellent.
about .NET Conf this year, and what I was speaking about is actually one of the last things I will be showing, unless there's more questions about the tool itself.
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment. Okay, let's just quickly switch
Cool. We're
to
doing a .NET Conf
German.
sneak preview.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do
Love
this.
it.
Yeah. So I realized that I had a lot of people asking for, yes, Erik, I'm running Visual Studio or some old Visual Studio version that doesn't exist anymore. I'm running Visual Studio Code. I love Paint, so I'm doing everything from the command line. I use the Visual Studio Code. What can I do? Because this extension, as we just saw, is something that only runs in Visual Studio 2022. So I decided what would be like the lowest common denominator for all this, and yes, you would be running this on a machine that could run .NET. So I decided to create a .NET global tool, which does the reverse engineering work that is part of Power Tools. It doesn't do DDML diagrams and things like that, but maybe one day it will do a mermaid diagram or something, some cross-platform diagram as well. But for the moment, it's just doing the reverse engineering dance. So in order to do that, you install .NET global tool called Erik EJ something in Power Tools.cli. I can't remember exactly, but you will end up having a command line called efcpt. And again, I don't think this is GitHub. Oh, sorry, this is probably just terminal being clever, but it looks a little bit like I'm on Copilot here as well.
Yeah.
Yes. So it will require you to enter a connection string, an AO.NET connection string to your database, and of course, things already start to get a little more down to the metal here, because then you actually have to be able to not just click and point to a database, but actually create a connection string for it. It can be daunting. There's a very nice website called connectionstrings.com that can help you a lot in that direction. And then you put in the name of the provider, and I have added some abbreviations for the provider. So for example, for SQL Server and Azure SQL, the abbreviation is simply MS SQL. So let's just have a look in this folder. There's nothing here. I'm not cheating. Right click, right arrow. So let's run the tool. And it will create, if there isn't already a configuration file, it will create one for us. It will show similar warnings to what we saw before. It will also create a README file. So I will take code in this case and efcpt README and open the README file.
Nice.
It's similar to the README file you got before, but it's actually, I'm not doing anything with your user project. I'm doing more stuff with the project in Visual Studio because I have a bit more of a handle on it, but it will show you what package you need to pick. I'm running version 7 of the command line tool here, so we are in EF Core 7 country, and also show you what you need to add to your code in order to start using the DB context. If we go back to the PowerShell, and it will also check if there's a newer version available, and propose that you install that newer version, because that is the only supported version of the tool. So if you want any help with it, you must be running the latest version.
Okay.
Yes. And let me just finish off by actually showing you the configuration file, because I discovered something really nice about Visual Studio Code. There's many nice things about Visual Studio Code, but one of them is the fact that you can actually create a schema file. So this is pretty raw compared to having a graphical user interface where you can just pick and choose and turn tables on and off and all that. But it can actually provide you with some, I don't know if you can see this, zoom in a bit. It can actually provide you with some context-specific help for each of these options, what they mean. You can discuss whether my explanations make any sense or not, but I'm always open to feedback. And it can actually also, provide you with some intelligence. So if you have the type mappings here, it will actually propose. So I'm just pressing tab now, and it will actually insert this code for you, which is valid configuration code for this tool based on the defined schema.
So that's a feature of Visual Studio Code?
That's a feature Visual Studio Code support. That's because Visual Studio Code supports JSON schema very well.
Okay.
I actually haven't tested this in Visual Studio. Maybe it supports it to the same extent, but it's not really important. But Visual Studio Code supports something called JSON schema, and it's all due to this magic incantation up here. So it reads this file, and this file describes the properties and the what is required and what is not required in this configuration file, which I find extremely helpful and better than having to create something that I don't know about, like how would you create a UI for this in Visual Studio Code. I'm completely, I wouldn't have a clue.
So, I guess
yes.
speaking of Visual Studio Code,
Mhm.
do you have these extensions that work inside Visual Studio Code?
Yes, you can run the Power Tools from the terminal. The Power Tools command line edition you can run from inside the terminal in Visual Studio Code. That's correct. But I don't have a visual tool, if that's what the question is referring to.
Okay, I guess that was. Do you have any plans for that?
I'm willing to accept a pull request from anybody who knows how to do it. Absolutely. But it's not on my plate.
Got it. All right. Fair enough.
That kind of concludes what I had on display today.
Okay, so Dick's back with the question. How can EF Power Tool create separate config classes, but the scaffold DB context has no such switches?
How can EF Core Power Tools create separate configuration classes? But the Power Tools does not have such switches?
Yeah, it's in the, here's the comment.
Yeah, you saw it in this configuration file. Is that what you mean? Or
Dick,
is it the CLI? Is it the CLI you're referring to?
Dick, can you
yeah, can you
be a little more specific about what the question is?
Are you talking about split DB context?
I don't know.
It probably is. That option is also there, but I deliberately don't expose it because it's a preview feature.
Okay.
Yeah. So as we can see now on the screen, that the option is there, but because it's a preview feature, I don't automatically include it because, yeah.
Okay. All right. Any other questions?
It's there.
Before we, Erik has it, but EF team don't. Oh, okay. So you get it. All right, cool.
So let's if you want to learn more about the command line edition, stay tuned for .NET Conf. And if you want a sneak peek, I've actually appeared on .NET Live recently with a demo of the Power Tools CLI edition as well. Yeah, a month ago apparently. So.
Excellent.
Yes.
All right. Okay.
So, yeah.
Any other questions before we wrap up?
And
so
if you didn't get your questions answered, feel free to ping me on Twitter or write me just a question on GitHub. I really appreciate any type of feedback because it usually helps me improve the tooling for the benefit of all my users. Yeah.
Okay, I think Dick is getting a little more specific. Having many tables makes it easier to have separate config classes, but scaffold DB context has no such option.
That's correct, but Power Tools and the Power Tools CLI has. So that's why you should be using the Power Tools CLI if you want that, or the Power Tools in Visual Studio if you want that feature.
Okay. All right. Erik, thank you so much. As always, fantastic stuff. Awesome, awesome tool. There's a reason so many people have downloaded it and it has a 5-star rating. It's because it is awesome. And it just continues to be awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks again for coming on the show. And I promise I won't wait 2 years to get you back.
Let's see. But thanks.
Wow. Here's me making promises. All
Yeah.
right. Thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. And we will see you next time on Visual Studio Toolbox.